thanks very much for the introduction and also for the territorial acknowledgement and for the thoughtfulness of the territorial acknowledgement. I really appreciated that. So, as was said, my name's Josh. I'm from the BC Civil Liberties Association. But one of the things that we've always been working on, and working on very hard since we began back in the 60s, is the issue of protest rights. Which is just the right of people to make their voices heard in democratic conversations. It's not just protest rights, that's one subset, but it's freedom of expression generally, it's democratic rights more broadly. And so in that vein, and this is something where we do actually give credit to the Vancouver Observer and the National Observer. Last summer, you might remember the secret spying hearings where CSIS was alleged to have been spying on environmental groups and First Nations, and I don't know more. We brought those complaints forward. Of course, the information that was happening was brought forward by the Observer. And whenever we've had a press release on it, we've always credited the Observer as well. And Legal Observers is another thing that we've done. So if any of you were maybe up on Burnaby Mountain, you might have seen people up there in orange t-shirts watching things, trying to take notes of what was happening. That's something that we've long been involved with as well. So turning to slap suits, how many people in here, and you don't feel like you have to put your hand up or identify yourself, how many people in here have been to a protest? Yeah, I thought it would be something like that. And how many people in here feel like you've ever worried about whether there might be repercussions against you for getting involved in those kinds of things, whether or not it actually stopped you, but if you've thought about it and wondered about it? I certainly have. So it's about half the people in the room have at least turned their minds to, have at least had in their head that there might be some kind of negative repercussion for the kind of ways in which you're expressing your activism. British Columbians know that lawfully participating in the political life of this province can be a risky business. And one of the reasons that they can be such a risky business is because of slap suits, strategic lawsuits against public participation. Actually, you don't need to say slap suits, because lawsuit is one of the words, but we tend to say slap suits. And these fundamentally aim to penalize citizens. Well, they don't have to be citizens, I'm using the word citizens. They penalize individuals for participating in public affairs and aim at deterring others who are not participating from participating. And they've often targeted local residents, citizens' councils, municipal governments, neighborhood groups, and protesters. Not necessarily just protesters, not necessarily just occupiers. It's people who are writing letters to the editor and stuff like that. May never leave their home to engage in their activism or their participation. Who get sued for all kinds of different things. And this has happened sort of over and over and over again in this province, where people have been harassed, where they've been intimidated, where they've been litigated into silence by stronger parties with really not meritorious, and in some cases completely outrageous causes of action, what we call in law a cause of action. It's the thing you actually sue for. And they come in lots of different varieties. It's not just the folks who may have been having a picnic or a gathering in a location on a mountaintop that was inconvenient to certain corporations. They can be filed for all kinds of different reasons. In the States, we've seen a lot of what are called veggie libel suits, where people just make good faith public interest pronouncements about, oh, I think this particular kind of spinach may have been tainted with E. coli. Oprah Winfrey saying that she wasn't sure about eating beef in the wake of mad cow disease. She was sued. The whole reason Dr. Phil is actually even famous is because she had to move her show from Chicago to Austin, Texas for months to defend a lawsuit because she had said that she was worried about contaminated beef. And Dr. Phil was a local personality there, and he kept getting on the show because they had to find Austin-based guests. So it's just an interesting side story. That it was so, and she's very rich and obviously can defend herself perfectly, but like, it was that disruptive. And that's the most famous of those agricultural disparagement suits. There are slaps by public servants or politicians against citizens. We've seen this in BC recently in Lillooet, where one of the top public servants in the town actually had his lawsuit against a citizen bankrolled by the town. It was part of his employment contract. Someone was complaining about how water was being dealt with there. We've seen real estate slaps where developers are filing suit against local residents who may be opposed to their plans. In a case in Vancouver, on Vancouver Island recently, someone complaining through a letter to the editor in the newspaper about there was going to be a particular trail through a field that was taken away if a development was going to be done in a certain way. And the person was threatened with a lawsuit that they were encouraging trespass because they were pointing out the existence of a trail that had been there for like 30 years. Corporate slaps against customers for filing complaints or for talking publicly about products, not just in the resource development protest context, but I think that the ignition or the brakes on this model of car is defective, and I think that's why my kid is dead type of thing, where large manufacturers and corporations have sued over product complaints. And finally, slaps in the environmental sector or the resource development sector, where people and groups are speaking out against resource development. And we're going to hear some stories, I think, that come from that vein today. And then, so that's sort of like the different circumstances in which these things can happen. And then they can, of course, be of different kinds. A lot of time, like a different kind of lawsuit. Like a lot of time in the past, people tended to think about slaps as defamation suits. It was like, and Donald Trump does these all the time, where he sues or threatens to sue, even like, I think this week since he's been president-elect, threatening to sue people in defamation for suing journalists even, for saying things against him. In Ontario, we're going to hear a bit about Ontario's new anti-slap legislation. The first test of that legislation is actually in court right now in Ontario. It's a town councillor in Richmond Hill, Ontario, suing a resident who, during the election, compared him to Snoop Dogg, and he alleges that that's defamatory because, well, that he's trying, I don't know why, but anyways, that's the allegation. And so we will learn soon whether Ontario's anti-slap legislation protects people from being sued for likening others to Snoop Dogg. But it's, they can be ridiculous seeming, they can be more serious. But 32 in a study in the States, and we don't have similar data in Canada, 32% of slap suits in the States actually involved economic torts. A tort is a word that we use in law which means a wrong you do to somebody else. So if I assault you and you sue me for that you're suing me for what we call a tort. If you like French, tort means wrong in French, and that's where we get it from. But economic torts. So these are the kinds of things like, oh, you were protesting here and my backhoes couldn't get in to dig these things and they were all sitting there waiting for a long time, and so you've caused me economic damage, or you've caused me to breach my contract with these folks, and because I couldn't get those backhoes in right away, well then my project's going to be delayed, and so that you've cost me at least $5.6 million in oil sales down the road. So I'm suing you for that too. So these are pretty heavy-duty things. The folks who were up in Peace River country, who were protesting at Rocky Mountain Camp against the Site C dam construction, were threatened by a crown corporation, by the government, not just some Calgary oil company, the government, threatening them with economic losses, with substantial damages, because of their protest there. And that's another thing that we might want to talk about more in discussion later, a particular kind of insidious thing where the government gets involved in this. Trespass and nuisance are other ones that are commonly used. You're here making a big racket, it's affecting my customers, you are here on my land or on land that's been licensed for me to use, and you're not supposed supposed to be, and all those kinds of things. The pervasiveness of slaps is really hard to measure. So those are all the different kinds, and there's more kinds too. I won't bore you with them all. But one of the reasons it's kind of hard to measure how much of an effect they have is because oftentimes slaps achieve their goals without ever going to court, without sometimes even, or oftentimes, without even a case being filed. It's merely the threat. It's the corporate spokesperson saying to the newspaper, well, those people better watch out because we may take legal action. Or it's the legal letter that's written directly to someone to tell them to be quiet. The mere threat of being sued will often sufficiently intimidate someone to stop their criticism. And all of that really insidious slap-type action happens totally beneath the radar. And if the person never speaks up or complains about it, no one ever knows that it happens. That's just a voice that isn't heard in the debate. And you could well imagine why. If you've got assets, you've got a house. If you haven't got assets or got a house, these things can be very costly for you. They can cost tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend. We know of people that have had to take out mortgages if they were fortunate enough to have a home. That those homes are being put in jeopardy. That means potentially their children's future economically may be put in jeopardy. And you're weighing that against your interest in the community service that you're trying to do, which your kids may also be affected by if you've got them. And then you've got and other people's kids, and it's tough. And you can see why totally reasonable and earnest and well-meaning people might shy away when they're faced with that kind of thing. Eco-Justice had pointed out, another organization that we work with sometimes, that it doesn't matter whether the cases are even strong cases. They can have a completely foolish case. But for you to show in court that it's foolish, without anti-slap legislation, without a way of dealing with it expeditiously or quickly, can cost tens and even hundreds of thousands of dollars, take up oceans of time, and of course deflect that time from the public purpose that you were setting out to achieve, which is, of course, the point. Their power doesn't come from the strength of a legal position. It comes merely from strategically using these legal tools in a way so as to intimidate groups and to exhaust and redirect their resources. There have been some good news stories recently in BC in relation to slaps, and that a case against Sven Biggs and the Wilderness Committee was thrown out by the Supreme Court of BC. They had been sued for being critical of the Fish Lake Mine, Testambini mine project, and Taseko, which is the company that wanted to build the mine, sued them, and Wilderness Committee said, well, no, this is fair comment on a matter of public interest. It's responsible communication. We have the right to be saying these things. And the court ultimately found that that was right and awarded what are called special costs, which are like super expensive, more than usual costs against Taseko to Wilderness Committee, and found that Taseko had engaged in reprehensible conduct. So that's one good news story out of hundreds of stories where it never even goes to court and the people are just silenced. If a company picks the wrong person to sue, who's got fundraising capacity behind them, who's got an organization that can attract legal support and public publicity and all those things, and who can afford to be fearless about it, then maybe that company is a fight on their hands. But in most cases, that's not the kinds of folks that are being sued. Sometimes it's Greenpeace, but sometimes it's just whoever. And those don't tend to go quite as well for those individual people. And that's why we need a solution. So I'll pass it along. You're going to hear some more stories about exactly how this manifests in people's lives and what might be done about it here in BC.